Hey, what is up, guys? It is Metagames GX here, and we are going to be talking about Stigmata, the Devouring Dragon, finally. So I did initially make a video on this card, but after some time with it, I wanted to make kind of like a final discussion video about it. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it once it comes out again too, but I wanted to discuss on how good it is for Branded Despia in particular. So we're going to go over the card, we're going to go over the combo with it, and then also talk about how viable and like the best use cases and where this card might be used in the future. So if you guys want to see more videos like this, leave a comment down below, like, and make sure you are subscribed. We're on the road to 14,000 subscribers right now, so I'd really appreciate it if you became a part of that journey. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So obviously, the Stigmata Devouring Dragon is a level 8 beast fusion monster that requires one Fall in the Valbaz plus a light or dark monster plus an effect monster. So this makes the card unsummonable directly off a branded fusion. However, you'll still be able to get to it if you go into Lubellion or Albion and then have a third monster in rotation. But I think this card really shines as a super poly target since it just requires a Fall in the Valbaz plus a effect or light or dark monster, or even a great target to go into Fall in the Valbaz with. Now, the effect is while an Ecclesia monster is on the field or in either graveyard, this card gains 500 attack, and it is also unaffected by other cards' effects. So this is Branded's first true towers. It's completely unaffected, but it's at 3,000 and it gains 500 at most. So that makes it kind of a smaller tower. However, it does have another effect in the form of if this card is special summoned at all. So that means you could special summon this from the graveyard. You can shuffle up to 2 cards from any graveyard or banishment into the deck, and then during the end phase, if this card was in your graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can add one Dogmatica or Tri-Brigade card from your deck to the hand. So this card also allows you to non-target shuffle 2 cards from either banishment or graveyard into the deck. So that means we finally have a thing to shuffle back a banished branded fusion that's face down off of like a Desires or even like a Kashtira Birth or something like that. So I think that's solid for the grind game, and it's a function that the deck didn't already have, which I think already merits, you know, having value for certain formats depending on the deck. Now let's talk about the interruption and how good the effect is. So before we get into the combo. Now, of course, we just went over the shuffle back 2 effect. This can also be used as a Keldo-like effect, right? Remember the shufflers from Tier Limit? Well, this is basically a shuffler for Branded. You get to non-target. I mean, it's even better because you get to non-target. I mean, I guess you only spin 2, but you can also target banishment, so it has its upsides with that too. But you can target 2 and shuffle them back. So Keldo always worked as a nice interruption for people's graveyard, and now we have that in the form of a fusion monster. So let's just say we're going against like Crystron or something and they set Smyger. Well, in the past, as a Branded player, you had no real way to interact with the Smyger besides going Sanctify or Revive Smyger to your own side of the field, which wasn't very good. So I do think that actually allows us to finally interact with non-light or dark decks in the graveyard, which I think is actually super solid and might just warrant the card in our extra deck by itself. And then also with the shuffle back effect, you have one branded fusion, right? So this is very good for recurring the branded fusion from your banishment or even graveyard, and then getting it back into rotation. Now, notably, it doesn't add back to hand. If it added back to hand like Altharion, it might be even better for our deck. But I think that having, when branded fusion's only at 1, having a card that can spin it back, you know, from the extra deck is a solid piece to the puzzle. I mean, obviously we have Branded Retribution, and then we also have the Spriggan's Kit, which not everyone runs Spriggan's Kit. I think you should probably be running Spriggan's Kit if you're on Branded at this point with one Branded Fusion. It makes Branded and High Spirits way better, and it allows you to play through hand traps pretty well. I do think that having a third option is good, but it's not something we didn't already have. And once again, if this card is just special summoned, like this could be off a Sanctifier, off a Quem, since it mentions Fall in the Valbaz, you can keep looping this card every turn, which is pretty solid in itself. Now, for the last effect, the Towers effect does, you know, have merit in some matchups where some decks just won't be able to out this, right? Like Yummy probably won't be able to out this very easily without getting a whole board up. And then also, I'm not saying this is what you should make. I think a Dragoon is just better against Yummy, frankly, in that situation. And that's kind of where this comes down to, because this doesn't have any sort of like quick effect that you can use to protect itself, like a purely Noir or a Lunalight Tiger Dancer, so I think that this card is definitely like the Towers effect is kind of just tacked onto it. I don't think it's like the reason you run this card. However, it is a reason to have this card in your deck. Now, it's a good like option to have in a grind game if you need to sit and like stall a few turns. Maybe this could also be an option, but I think a lot of decks have an option to out a 3,500 towers for the most part, so I would never rely on this as like a strategy in terms of the towers effect. Now, I think the special summon effect to spin back is actually very good, and it's a good interruption on your opponent's turn, right? If your opponent is, for instance, on Fiendsmith, I think this is the most obvious example. Your opponent can go Fiendsmith and Graveyard, put it into the graveyard, and then if they go Lurie, it's mandatory Lurie, so it has to go Chain Link 1. If you chain the summon of Stigmata with, like, let's just say a Branded in red, you can actually spin back the Lurie, and then also the Engraver immediately, which is pretty solid, but obviously you could do this at any point with just an Engraver and Graveyard against that deck, which is pretty solid. Obviously, we have the Bystials for that, but I think that comes up a bit more in the Smiger case. Now, I think the other use case for this card is being a Super Poly target or a monster to summon off of Fallen of Albaz with it when you go, like, let's just say Renbrum on your opponent's turn, or you go into Sanctifier on your opponent's turn, and then you can go Sanctifier, summon the Albaz, and then like summon an Albion or like a Mirror Jade, and then fuse it off. And then you can get this monster and then fuse off one of your opponent's effect monsters, which is really solid. We can finally fuse off any monster in against our opponent with this monster. I do think that's a super solid point. Because, you know, before we could go Fallen of Albaz, but we couldn't fuse off any monster. But with Sanctifier itself, you can always summon a light or dark, so this card will always be, you know, with Sanctifier at the very least, a way to fuse off any effect monster, which I think has a lot of utility as well. And then once again, if you just hard open Albaz or have a way to, like, summon Shrouded and then have Super Poly, you can then obviously just fuse off 2 monsters on your opponent's side of the field, and it's very solid. Now, do I think it's better than what we already have? No. Do I think it's an option that we don't have that is good to add to our arsenal? Yes. And I also think that it's not necessarily worth running the Ecclesia in the main deck for the Towers effect. I think Ecclesia was already a solid card to run in Branded as a, you know, good discard, a good endboard piece, but I think at the end of the day, you don't need to run the card, even for the Towers effect. I think you would run this card for the Shuffleback effect, and then also being able to potentially, like, search out a Quem or a Mercurier in the end phase, since it can also search out a, when sent to the graveyard, search a Dogmatic or a Tri-Brigade card. If you also choose to run the new Dogmatica Fleur-de-Lis, the Thunderous, you can also search this, and then during the main phase, if it was, if a monster with special summon from the extra deck is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. So you can summon this, and then you can set one Dogmatica trap, so you could run a Dogmatica Punishment. Maybe this could be going first sides or something like this. I don't recommend this engine, honestly, in Branded. I think Branded has enough bricks. You don't need to be running Dogmatica Punishment in there, plus another brick in Fleur-de-Lis, but I do think it's something that you can do off of this, and it's notable at least. But also, Dogmatica Punishment, as Galzo mentioned on Twitter, in my original thread about this, you know, until the end of your next turn after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. So you are locked out of the extra deck for 2 turns with this card. So I do think that's really notable and something that you probably don't want to be running with Branded, but obviously there are cards like Nadir Servant that can also play with that. Would you ever run the other Ecclesia? I don't think so. I think it would only be this Ecclesia, if anything, if you're running Branded Despia. However, if you're running regular Dogmatica, obviously you could run the other, and then the Fleur-de-Lis package. I think this card is actually pretty good inside of there too as well, but I think for Branded, it's just something that would be our 15th or 14th extra deck card that allows us to have a really good Renbrum grind game, because as you know, if you play Branded for any certain amount of time, Renbrum's one of your best endboard pieces with Branded. A lot of the time, all you need is a Mirror Jade plus a Renbrum with an Albaz in the graveyard with like a discard, and you are off to the races, and this card just helps that, because now you can fuse off just any effect monster with it. Obviously, your opponent needs to have a light or dark monster, and that's where I think it gets a little dicey as a Renbrum target, because you should never be letting your opponent have 2 monsters on the board unless it's like Malice or Ryzeal. Hey, and honestly, against those decks, that's pretty good. However, why would you want to make this card against those decks over, like, let's just say, off the Renbrum, instead of making like an Albion, fuse off one of the lights, and then make a Boral, and then you get follow-up in the form of Albion immediately. You get Branded Fusion immediately. You don't just spin it back to the deck with Stigmata. So I think at the end of the day, it's a good card to have in your extra deck. And it's kind of like this guy said, which I was saying in my own Twitter thread, like, why would you fill up a tight extra deck slot with this? He says Sanctifier. I think you should be running Sanctifier anyways. It's a good Uolo's target. But why would you fill the tight extra deck with this card when you could do this gimmick instead of using Albaz to fuse into MJ, Chaos, or Borreload? I think those cards more or less do more, but I think against certain matchups, this card ends up being decent. Just for like the water decks, the non-light or dark decks with Sanctifier, since you get to fuse off any of their monsters, and a lot of the time you would have to run like a Sprined in the past in order to fuse off anything that your opponent has. This used to be one of our most generic Renbrum targets. I mean, sometimes Titanclad is, but like we have that in the graveyard a lot of the time. So I think this just being super generic for the Albaz is super solid. And honestly, I might just run this card just to have a clean like end board piece for decks like Mermail and like Crystron and stuff like that. The Canine cards, Vanquish Soul, for instance. And speaking of Vanquish Soul, this card's a great Super Poly target into that. Yummy. Because Vanquish Soul, I mean, obviously they can go on Mad Love and then any other their other effect monsters. If you just set Albaz, chain Super Poly, you will be able to end up doing that. Like, you could fuse off Ryzeal Detonator being a light plus the Murakamo as an effect monster plus Albaz. Like, you could fuse off Cryptor plus Topologic. You can even fuse off Baguska plus Albaz plus another monster, whether you have like a light or dark in rotation elsewise. So I think this card actually gives our deck a lot more flexibility. I think, you know, I'm almost convincing myself this is a better card than it is, but once again, I just think its interruptions are not as good as going into Chaos Star Source, Mirror Jade. Like, you would never want to actively make this against a deck over those cards in a lot of situations. I think against like things like Crystron, it's quite good, but like once again, you have to let them play the game, and sometimes they don't even start with their Crystron combo. They go into the VS Canine stuff, right? Or into the Canine stuff rather, not the VS Canine stuff. But yeah, so this is just like a build I threw it in. This isn't exactly the final build, trust me guys. And this was the original thread, basically. You know, searches the new Fleur in the end phase for opponent's card, then can set punishment if you really want, or just like Quem. It gives Branded a mechanic it didn't have, and non-target banishment spins. It's good for an infinite grind game, and it can also be a double DD Crow. It's a Towers, but it's a good Super Poly plus an Uka target. You could also use this off of Uka with Albaz, which is pretty solid. Infuse off 2 bodies, which you were always able to do, you know, with whatever you summon. You will be getting rid of those bodies plus more. But the investment is heavy when you're using Albaz, Branded White, Branded Red, Cartesia Fusion effect instead to make this instead of Mirror Jade, a Chaos, a Boral. It's not worth it, even if you fuse off 2 of your opponent's monsters and then spin back 2 meaningful cards in an opponent's grave. Maybe in this case, if it was 2 meaningful cards, I think it would actually be worth it. But that's like the difference you have to decide. If they have nothing in graveyard, I think there's no point in making this card. I also think with Alba Linnaeus and Secretarion, this card just provides infinite grind game for Branded. Now, I don't think that's necessarily what we need to be doing, especially with the new time rules coming out. Like, we don't need to be going to time grinding our asses off, but it is an option there. And I did just want to shout out Galzo right here, because Galzo did make a really cool combo, which shows off like the potential of this card. So let's talk about it. So once again, this is Galzo on Twitter and on YouTube. Please check him out down below. I just figured I would shout him out for this since he's the one who originally made the combo. So this is going to be an Aluber plus Cartesia combo with Aluber plus Fusion deployment. He starts Fusion deployment, no Fua hopefully. Go Cartesia into Aluber, and then we have Branded Fusion to go into Albaz plus the Lubellion. We then go into the Albion, and then Albion into Lubellion, discarding one of the discards, fusing back Albaz plus the Lubellion for the Mirror Jade, just standard Branded line, and then we tribute off the Albion for the Lubellion in the graveyard, and then go Lubellion effect to activate the Branded Lost from our deck. And now we can go Cartesia effect to fuse off the Lubellion plus herself for the Grand Guignol, and we can go Grand Guignol 1 plus Branded Lost 2, and then we go for Mercurier, which is another interruption on top of the Mirror Jade, but then also we get to send the Dogmatica Lulu Wall Lilith to the graveyard, or the Despian Lulu Wall Lilith to the graveyard, if you guys saw that right here. Yeah, this guy. And this is also going to special summon a light spellcaster with equal attack and defense from your deck or hand in the end phase. So you get to go Cartesia back to hand since the Albion's in the graveyard. Now you get to go into Albion to set the Branded in red, and then you go Lulu to summon out the Ecclesia. And now you can go out to, and Ecclesia can obviously now just be the Albaz on your opponent's turn. And then you can go Ecclesia effect, summon out the Albaz, and then in this combo line, he's fusing off 2 of your opponent's monsters. This is the most ideal scenario. I think against Ryziel Malice, this is definitely very good, but against decks like, or even Yummy, but against decks like Dracotal, I think this is kind of dubious. Also, VS Canine, it really just depends. Because they can just chain, right? So in this combo, you then go out to the Devouring Dragon. You can go Devouring Dragon to spin back 2. He's going to spin back his 2 extra deck cards. And this is what I'm talking about, where like a lot of the time, the spin backs aren't like that crazy unless you're interrupting your opponent. Like, yes, the grind game is good, but like you already had a pretty good grind game off of Branded to begin with. He's going to search the Golden Sword Soul, which is also another funny card that we use in Master Duel a lot. But obviously, now what I think instead of this, you obviously, like, let's just say he has even 2 monsters here. We can still do Albaz and then fuse off one of the monsters, make a Albion into Boral, and then we get to pop the other token, and then we get Albion into the graveyard for Branded Fusion in the end phase. So and then also we could have just sent the Titanclad, gone Mirror Jade, send the Rinbrum, do our thing. So it's kind of like the same thing that we would be doing anyways. I think this card's really good in the situations where you spin back from the graveyard with this card. So I would recommend, like, you know, checking this card out when it does come out in the Branded structure deck October 25th. Of course. So what do you guys think of the card? Do you think it's very good or not? I think it's, like, honestly, like a solid 6 out of 10. I don't think 6 out of 10 is bad. I think it's good. I think it's a solid card. I don't think it's a card you need to run in Branded, but I do think it is potentially one of the best, like, just generic cards that we could have in our extra deck for just, like, covering some of the bases we couldn't really do before, such as spinning back banishment cards, and then also being able to interact with your opponent's graveyard is very important. And then just the Towers effect is very solid. And as you guys saw in Galzo's combo there, he did actually run the Ecclesia, which I, you know, once again, you can definitely run because it's a good end board piece. But then again, in that build, you have to run also the Dogmatic or the Despian Lulu Wall Lilith. And if you guys see this extra deck, it's like, I can't run this in Branded Dracotal, and we don't know if we'll be on Branded Dracotal by October 25th because we don't know what the second card is. For this set, or for the structure deck, we are getting one more generic piece of support for Branded in that structure deck, so I'm hoping it's a bit, like, better than this card. I do think that this card's good. I'm glad we have it. I think I will use it in the future, but once again, A, I don't think it's required, and B, I don't think it's, like, gonna be the thing that pushes Branded into top tier status. I think that we should still be focusing on the Dracotal cards, and then also you know, trying to perfect the builds. This is currently once again, don't mind this build. This is just using it to discuss this piece. But yeah, once again, lots of interruption, lots of things to do off this card, but at the end of the day, I don't think this is going to do everything for the deck that we need. So with that being said, let me know down below, leave a like, subscribe today, click the join button if you want to help support the channel, join my classroom. Also pick up my Branded spreadsheet, which has a bunch of Dracotal and Mitsurugi combos. All of these are updated too every month with new combos. So if you guys want to support the channel, make sure to do that. And then also we stream every Monday and Friday, sometimes Wednesdays locals, and once again, daily uploads. So if you subscribe to be a part of that journey, road to 20K, love you all. Have a great rest of your day. Metagames GX signing out.